Welcome everyone to our very first talk of the Camberwell Roundtable events. In the talk of illustrating history, what does this moment mean? I'll share some materials for today. Okay, oh, wait, sorry, just to make sure you can hear me. Share computer sound. Okay, you guys can see the slides, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So welcome everyone to join our first event. We're all very excited about a part of the graduate showcase as well. Today we're very happy to have Olivia Twist and Mireille Fauchon joining us for a conversation about illustration and social history. So I'll begin with introducing Olivia Matherin Acedo, or Olivia Twist. So Olivia is an illustrator, art facilitator and lecturer from East London with an MA in visual communication from Royal College of Arts. The key themes found in her work are place, the mundane and overlooked narratives. Her interest in social history leads her to a human-centered research methodologies. She's determined to make the arts, heritage institutions, and arts education more accessible and representative of their local communities. So thank you so much for joining us today, Olivia. Olivia lectures at Camberwell College of Arts while working on a wide range of commissions. Today, she will share with us about her project 345, which explores a ritual practiced by both secondary school and college students on their way home. Next up, we've got Mireille. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mireille. So Mireille is a London-born illustrator and educator of mixed Indian and British heritage. Her practice-based PhD at Kingston University, London, was inspired by the Holloway Prison Diaries of Croydon Suffragette Katie Gliddon, which explores the use of visual storytelling to describe historical and contemporary social cultural narratives. The project emphasized on experiences that might otherwise be difficult to engage with or access. Mireille lectures at the Royal College of Art, London, and is a commissioning illustration editor of Ambit magazine. Today, Mireille will share with us her PhD project, Don't Believe the Papers, Tales of Everyday Life Interpreted and Told through narrative illustration practice. So thank you so much, Mireille, for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm your host.
Sorry, love. I just thought I'd just maybe mention.
Yeah.
I actually teach at Ravensbourne University, London.
Okay.
Don't worry, just on the record.
Sorry. Okay, we'll make
Tell us about you. Most important.
Okay. Thank you so much for clarifying that information. I'm your host today. I'm Olivia. I've graduated from Camberwell this year from illustration. My work focuses around stories from the everyday life and mixed cultural experiences. My graduation project is a children's book called Little Fox and the Wonders of Home, a story that explores the power of imagination under a restricted environment inspired by the COVID lockdown. I'm also interested in presenting bigger, heavier topics with humor and gentleness. So here are the introductions. And to begin with, we'd like to invite Mireille to share with us about your project. Sorry, Don't Believe the Papers. Mireille.
Perfect. I mean, would you like to see some things, or do you just want me to talk a little bit about it? What would you prefer?
It would be great if you've got images that. Should I go back to the slide earlier with the images that you shared before?
Yeah, or if you want, I can share my screen.
Yeah, that would be lovely, yes.
Give me 2 seconds.
No worries. Okay, I think you should be able to share the screen now. Just change the setting very quickly.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
No worries.
do this. Can you guys see this?
Yes, very clear, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, just maybe briefly, I was just saying before everyone tuned in that I have just submitted. So I'm not quite there yet. I haven't gone through the examination yet, but I've just submitted my my PhD to be examined on Friday. So it's all very fresh, but I have been working on it for 4 years. So when I entered into the PhD, I had I really came into a sort of few projects under my belt where I had been exploring similar themes. I've always been really interested in local and social history, but the kinds of histories and really stories which were maybe the kinds of things that were maybe not always the most spectacular kind of stories. So the kinds of narratives and kinds of historical narratives I've always been interested in are, the thing that happened down the road, or how did that crack in the wall get there, or the stories that people tell themselves. And I've never really been interested in, I'm not a historian in that sense. I'm not interested in kind of any kind of truth of a matter. I think that's a really tricky word to use anyways, but I'm interested in the stories that we tell about ourselves in order to make sense of our experiences and a sense of the moment we're living in. So when I started my PhD, I was like, you know what, the way that we as illustrators work is so rigorous, actually, and we have a lot of ways of working that have a lot of depth in them. And I couldn't really find at that point any I mean, there's a lot of fantastic conversation, there's a lot of incredible teaching. So I do feel like the value and the kind of depth of recognized, but I feel like it hasn't been formalized in a way that perhaps it has in other subjects. Not so much has so formally been written about it or researched, and that is what a PhD project is. It's a research project where you have an idea or research questions, and then you investigate it, you put your hypothesis, your ideas into practice. And I had this feeling that the work that I could see my students doing and my friends doing and my community of people doing had so much rigor and so much discipline in the practices, and that wasn't really being recognized. And the way that we were telling stories, and more so investigating stories, interpreting materials, the way we went about our research, especially so for me, because I've always been interested in social history, there's quite an established I would say, kind of lineage of reportage and documentary illustration. I feel like we're quite familiar with that. But I had this feeling that I didn't quite fit into that group either, because I was really interested not so much in just recording something, but also thinking about how maybe the work as illustrators can be used to interpret history as well as just documenting it. And actually, those two things for me can't be separated. So when I started my PhD, I had an idea and I had some projects that I had done, but I didn't have this kind of core case study. Always worked with local archives, and I'm very interested. And I can see why you've brought Olivia and I together without maybe knowing so much about because we were establishing before, have a relationship within our work and with each other. We know each other's work and each other very well. But I also have this relationship with local heritage centres. I've always worked quite closely with archives and with archivists and local historians. So I had some previous projects, and there were certain themes I was drawn to. So I already had quite an methodology, a way of working. There were certain themes that I was interested in. Something about female narratives. We've said the local history thing, the histories that are not. I'm not interested in truth and fiction, but I am interested in how stories change to suit purpose. and how they change within the moment that they're understood. And so this thing that a story can't be fixed or a history can't be fixed, so maybe some stories that can be interpreted in lots of different ways. And so I went into my PhD thinking, okay, I sort of have a way of working, and I have these kind of core ideas, women's stories, stories that might go under the radar. It's very fixed to place and local history. Quite often those places are my places. So I'm interested in the kind of stories of the people that I'm surrounded by, whether I know them or not, but I feel like this is it. And I'm really interested in how stories attach themselves to places. So in official and unofficial ways. So let's say the official ways are maybe how stories attach themselves. So how stories are contained within the archive through records, but there's loads of unofficial things, like the things that we do to maintain the stories of ourselves. We keep scrapbooks, there are boxes of photographs everywhere. We tell each other things, we don't even know how we know them, but I know that somebody died in that house, and I know a murder happened there, and I know this and I know that, and I'm not quite sure how I know them. So in a way, I'm sort of interested in this kind of hearsay and gossip and sort of mythologies in a way. But so I went into my PhD and I had this idea. Okay, I knew that there were certain themes, and then I went to a conference that was all about engaging communities in archival collections, that's run annually by the National Archives, DCDC it's called. And I heard a fantastic talk by the head of library at LSE, and she was talking about the acquisition of the women's library by LSE. And she said such beautiful things about how she wanted the women's library to be used, how the collections to be used. So I got in touch with her, and very quickly was put in touch with the archivist who works there. And I took my laptop down and I said, I've just started this PhD. I've got these ideas. I know that I want to use my work as an illustrator to explore narratives that might go unheard. And I took her through some of my past projects, so she got a feeling for some of the subjects that I was interested in. I had done a project about a historic witch trial in a local Suffolk community, and I had done some work with looking at a historic murder mystery that took place just down the road from where I was born. And I should say that some of these projects were projects that went all the way back to like my MA. Some of them went even further. So some of the things that I just talked to her about were, things that I was doing now. So one thing I will say to anyone that's watching us and listening to us is that if you're a student and you're making work, this work is really valuable. The stuff you're doing now is really valuable and might inform your ideas later on, because it certainly did with me. And then she said, I think maybe you should have a look at some of the prison diaries. And she showed me the Holloway Prison Diaries for the Suffragette. She said, I think some of these might interest you, listening to what you're interested in. And she showed me how to search the archives. And I just did a blank search, and I found out one of the first collections that came back, the prison diaries of a Croydon Suffragette called Katie Gliddon. And the thing, I didn't know anything about her when I was looking through the work, and through her collection rather. And it was the most extraordinary collection of papers I'd ever seen. So I made this kind of very blind discovery of this woman who went to prison in 1912 for taking part in the mass glass smashing campaign. She was from Croydon. I didn't know anything about that when I ordered the collection, but Croydon is a place that is I feel quite close to. It's not where I'm from, but it's a place that I've been to many times. And I'd actually also been in touch with the archivist at Croydon Museum to talk to her about my project. So there were all these coincidences. And then as I started to navigate through her writings, so she was in prison for 2 months, and she wrote a diary that was penned in the margins of a compendium of poetry by Percy Bysshe Shelley. So in itself, it was quite an extraordinary collection. So I systematically started to go through and read her materials, and the most incredible narrative started to emerge, but not instantly. So in the first instance, her story, it was so, the diary that she kept while she was in prison recorded details that, of course, it's interesting because you're reading about the past. It's a very grand historical moment, the suffragettes, the women fighting for the vote. But actually, it was so ordinary that it was this word that we've already heard, mundane. It was quite, it was quite dull, actually. But what I discovered later, when I finished reading that original diary, is that she had kept writing her account. So when she was released from prison, she wrote it again. And then more details came out about the forcible feeding and the torture and the experiences. And then she wrote it again and again, and it started to change and mutate. And I'll just stop it there because I can talk about this forever, and we don't need to talk about it forever. But what you're seeing here is a kind of digital scrapbook of my processing of what I was reading. So I won't go through all of it, and I'll just scroll through, but basically it's thinking about some of the things that came out, her experiences of describing prison, the solidarity she felt with other people, but also I'm interested in how stories exist now and how historical stories exist now. So I was really drawn to contemporary Croydon. I had some exhibitions of the work as I was interpreting it in Croydon, and I got in touch with the museum, who also hosted an exhibition. So it was all about using illustration to interpret this narrative, and that's what you're seeing is some of these ideas coming out. But I'll leave it there because I feel like I've spoke too much on this.
No, I think it's great. Thank you so much for sharing for so much about the development of your project. Like obviously that course of idea development before you even get into the archive, all the looking back and visiting the women library in LSE and all those conversations just back what you've looked into before. I think it's all really interesting that especially the part when you shared about how stories would change and there's no absolute idea of fiction, but then how a story is told, a story is fitting into a certain period of time. That's a very interesting thing to think about. Like, and with us illustrators, or we work with images, how do our illustrations also change? We're in. That's really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So we can always come back later, but I'd like to invite Olivia to. Oops, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, very well.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and Olivia, would you like to share with us about your project 345?
Yeah, cool. So I did this project when I was finishing my master's. Maybe that was like 2017. And it was just like, maybe while I was there, I don't know, you just get maybe a bit tired of the space and stuff. And I just wanted something that felt familiar, something that felt homely. Something that's playful, something that felt like it's just for me, So then I said, all right, then, like, I don't know, I just looked at, okay, what do I enjoy exploring? What do I enjoy breaking down? I'm somebody that I just like to look at stuff. To get me on the bus, I'll be watching. When I go to the market with anybody, I'll be watching everything. You smell, sounds, I love all of that. So I thought, okay, let me do it. At the time, brothers, they'd started school, and your own freedom. You can be going with. What's that noise? What's that opera music kind of?
I don't know. It's someone's
Okay.
I don't know where that music comes from.
I think as a host, you might be able to mute everybody, so that might be an idea.
I'll just mute everyone
Accident.
to make sure. Okay.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, so I said, yeah, my brothers, they've started secondary school, they've got a bit of freedom now. What are they doing that I used to be doing? And it is that thing after school, yeah. So we'll say on a Friday, yeah, that's the best day of the week. A Friday, school's done, or college. So you wait for your friends at the school gate, or maybe just outside of the school gate. And then maybe you'll be waiting for 7 people, 10, it depends, yeah. And then now you're deciding, like, okay, let's go and get some food. And of course, like when you're in secondary school, the only thing you can afford is chicken and chips. I guess growing up in East London, the only thing that was about also was chicken and chips, you know, like on the main roads, there's probably like 5 different chicken and chip shops. But then we love that variety, you know, because not everybody likes their chicken wings from the same place. So, yeah, you go with your mates. The meal that you'll get is the £1 meal, 2 wings and chips. Maybe some of your friends, they got a bit of money, so they would maybe get a chicken burger meal and then Fanta fruit twist or Miranda. Yeah, so I call it 3:45 because that's the time that we all link up and go. And then it's the thing that some of you would finish your food in the shop, some of you will finish it on the road, on the way to the bus stop, and some of you will finish it on the bus. Yeah. I'll try and share my screen with you. Or maybe you can you flick through to the other slides?
Just we go back to the previous slide.
Yeah, just to my my illustrations, maybe you can share them.
Yeah. Sure. Cool.
Thank you.
Should I stop it here?
Or a bit more back. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so okay, this is just, you know, back of the bus, this was the life, you know. And then so while I was doing my research for this project, which just involved a lot of walking about, so I would sit on the 277 bus, which goes from like deep East London, like Isle of Dogs, to Highbury and Islington, so like deep east to North London. And I would sit on that bus for like more than an hour on Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays. I did that for like 3 months as well. So that was like 12 weekly travel cards, 36 bus journeys, 54 hours. We were just there, you know, on the bus, eavesdropping, you know, just doing little bits of drawing. And then also like at the time, or maybe even now, like I look quite young, so I could sit at the back of the bus and nobody would watch me. Do you get what I mean? Like, what's this lady doing here, you know? So yeah, we'll just be there and you'll hear so many things and not everything was interesting, do you get what I mean? But it was all important, you know? And then you just start to notice like, okay, the kind of uniform, you know, that everybody wore, you know, the grooves of the shoe underneath, you know? And then you start like noticing the bus moquette. And then just all of those things that just make you say, wow, like this is something, you know, because I guess like all of us, maybe like growing up, we all did it, but it doesn't seem like anything at all. Like when I was having crits, when I was having crits, like during my masters, and I was talking about, okay, why I want to do this project, this, some people, they were like to me, oh, but Olivia, you know, the chicken isn't like, treated well, it's not free range and stuff like this. And I was like, do you know what, it's not about the chicken, do you understand? It's about like how we create our identity. It's about how we boost our confidence. It's about bonds. It's about just becoming who you are. It's about like learning how to banter during these times. This is where, social rituals, this is where you get it, you know, this is where you get it. So I also like had this thing, like, you know, like if you're not making with people, you're not making for them, you know. So then I spent a lot of time going to various chicken and chip shops with like friends and like other like young people. I put out a little bit of an open call. So sometimes I'll be sitting in a shop in Brixton with somebody. We'll order the meal they used to order and we'll talk about the shop, you know, what we used to do there, what we learned, memories that we had from there. That was that kind of thing. And it was nice, like different interviews, 1 hour in the shop, just retracing those journeys. You know, we'll take the same bus. Sometimes like the bus that we used to take, it used to be a bendy bus, like 25 used to be a bendy bus, but I think that it became a bit dangerous, like it was knocking down people, so now it's just a double decker. But like just thinking about all of those things, that's what we were doing. And then also like, I guess the love of like working with found material. So you know, when you go to these shops, they have those mirrors that are a little bit convex and things like that. And then just like the tiles as well, like, so I wanted to kind of work with this kind of semi-granite marble kind of countertop thing, yeah. And I ordered samples, like little free samples, and you know what, when I drew on them, it just didn't look right, yeah. So then now I've just got like some little tiles that I got from Pound Shop, yeah. And by the time I'd finished my course and stuff, the tiles were cracking, but the illustration on there just felt correct. Do you get what I mean? That's the thing that I feel was just about this project. And then I guess during this project, it also caused me to like question, where does my work belong? You know, like, because I feel like, I don't know, like in the gallery, I don't know, I don't see myself too much as a gallery person. Do you get what I mean? The stories I'm telling, I want the people who are in them images to see the images first. I want them to feel like, okay, this is for me. You know, that kind of shock of the familiar. I remember one time going to the V&A with my dad, and they had this exhibition, this small temporary pop-up exhibition, and it was about like Caribbean photography, you know, like the early times where our grandparents arrived. And, you know, just to see the way people will be posing in these photo studios with the plastic flowers and the backdrops and all of that. And then my dad just didn't expect to see that in the V&A at all. And, you know, just seeing that, it just makes you feel like your story matters. Do you get what I mean? Those mundane, those small rituals that we don't think is anything, we just do it, but it's something and it matters. Do you get what I mean? Even while I was doing this project for my master's, like like little drawings on there. And then I built some nice relationships with the chicken and chip shop owners. I would stick them on the wall in their shops. And then, you know, you'll see the kids coming after school, seeing those illustrations there, Snapchatting it, enjoying, laughing. Do you get what I mean? Because you just think like this, you know, sometimes the way the menus are designed, like the graphics is a bit crazy. Some of the fonts they be using, sometimes the chicken is stretched. Like there's 7 different fonts on one poster, but you know what, you're just spending time and drawing them. Do you get what I mean? Like just seeing that, you know what, this is important and this is something that matters to me. Something that, maybe if you stop sharing your screen, I could share my screen. Is that possible? Let me try.
No worries.
Thank you. Let me see. Do you know what, yeah? Because I'm doing it from my phone, it's a bit strange. But maybe I can just show some more of my pictures on that slideshow.
Yep.
You want us to bring up your website or something, Olivia?
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
can I can share your website.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that would be good. The
Uh,
project is 45 on there.
okay, just bear with me for a second. I'm just gonna go to your website, and
Thank you.
then no problem. It's on my search history, so very handy.
Thank
All right. I will share that. 1 second.
Just have like one little scroll through,
No
just to,
problem. So here's the website, and
yeah,
oops. So that's the introduction. Should I scroll down now?
yeah, loading,
Okay.
yeah.
My internet is a little bit slow, so bear with me.
No problem.
The thing with Zoom, the dependence on internet speed.
Yeah,
I'm
easy.
really sorry.
No problem. But then, like, I guess also working that fluorescent material, yeah, just playing with feelings of like hypervisibility and invisibility in the institution. Do you get what I mean? That was something that packing. And then also while doing the project, like, like being respectful of the people who work in the shop. I can't come during rush to be asking questions and to be interviewing people, and then also, I guess, like privacy as well. You can't just be taking pictures of strangers in the shop trying to eat, So just being a bit ethical with it. That's the key thing for me. So yes, these are some of
He is showing up now, finally.
yeah, it's coming. But then yeah, you can see like these are some of the line note illustrations. So this is the guy in the shop from the back, one mate on the bus, This as well. Because I feel like, sometimes like we have to like maybe demystify bits as well. When I first said that, oh, okay, I want to do this project here, people were feeling a bit apprehensive, and people were telling me about like the negative experiences that they've had with young people on the bus, like being rowdy and this and that. But you know what? Yeah, we have to let people live and grow. Do you get what I mean? So yeah, that was important to me.
I see.
So a little bit of doner kebab illustrations.
I really enjoyed when you share about bringing the marginalized to be seen. So like that, it's almost like you have this mission behind your project, and some people maybe in the beginning may not realize that the importance of that. They may think, oh, what's so important about this certain environment, because it's quite ordinary. But I guess that's the point, because it appeared to be ordinary. It got neglected.
Yeah. That's the thing. Like, not every story has to be grand and amazing and spectacular to be shared. Do you get what I mean? Some just everyday things are amazing. Do you get what I mean? We're our best, and it's important. Do you get what I mean? It's our stories. We need to document stories. There's like that. There's an author called Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi, and she was like, you have to write the things you want to read. Do you get what I mean? If you can't see it, you have to disrupt the single story, homogeneous story, add your own bit to it, So that's what illustration is for, for me personally. Yeah.
Is she the one who had a TED talk about the danger of having a single story?
Yes, I
Yeah,
love
I watched that TED talk before, and I found it really inspiring. And I think illustrators, essentially, a lot of us are also storytellers, and our role as storytellers. So what kind of stories do we tell? And that everyone has different walks of life, our cultural backgrounds, our heritage, our experiences, and those all affect the type of stories that we would go for, which again links to today's talk about like social history. Do you mind if I go back to the slide
Yeah.
with some discussion questions? I think this is the perfect timing for Mireille and Olivia and everyone to join and have a bit of discussion. So we've prepared some questions, but obviously if people have other questions, don't hesitate to just write down on the chat and we can talk about those together. So I think a very interesting thing about, so first off from Mireille's project, because your project has a lot to do with the history of it's a diary, so it's about the past and Katie Gliddon documenting her experience. And I don't know, what do you guys think about, from the history of illustration and its position with social history? Is it just for documenting, or does it have a commentary element to it as well? What do you guys think?
So I'm just thinking about the question. Are we thinking about how illustration can be used to examine histories, or are we talking about how illustration has been used, like the history of illustration, so how it's been used in the past?
I think it'll be great to maybe look into in what ways illustration was used to depict social history and the different angles, who was telling the story, how does that change the truth that people see, what kind of things? Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think so in regards to, I think actually it's, there's something in both of our works actually, and also I think with Olivia, with your work also, we are, you can't remove yourself from the fact that you are the illustrator, the same way that you couldn't remove yourself if you were a writer or a historian. If you're looking at whatever the subject is, and I'm looking at a historical past that's quite, that's like 100 years ago, quite past, or you're looking at a past that was yesterday or an hour ago, you're still documenting it through the kind of through your own vision. So for me, I'm not quite sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but the things that are coming to my mind are that I was very aware, and this is a part of my work, is that I'm not trying to find out the truth of what happened, or I'm also not isolated. So it's actually not the suffragette movement that I was ever interested in. Really, it just came out of the fact that I had been led there through my various themes. My project isn't actually, it is so entwined with that narrative, that history, but the actual project is how, I mean, it's more than one thing, but one of the main threads is that stories skip through time, and actually my work is about how I accessed that historical narrative through the moment of now, and what those and how I understood that history was connected through my own biography and my own understanding of the things that Katie Gliddon was writing about. So it was never a biographical exercise, and I think this is another thing that is maybe something that is resonating across our practices, this idea of biography, because I was reading someone's memoirs and it transpired that she wanted to have her account published, which again, we are always editing and thinking about how we present the information that we want people to know. But a memoir it's a very particular thing. It's, I'm telling you my story, and there's always agendas and, or people or interpretation. But I think that's also another thing to keep mine. So I think when I was working with that collection, I was never trying to only exist in the past. I think there was always this thing happening of that past. I wasn't, transported into the past and viewing it there. No, it was how I understood it through the things that were happening now. And it just so happened that it was like the 100-year anniversary, and where I was in my personal history and in my life, and the kind of realizing of my own feminism, and the kind of the maturing of my own personal politics and of my practice and of the things that I wanted to deal with. And I feel like this is some of the things that I can hear across all of our work. There are these certain themes, I was also very aware that this, like, who is this work for, and what is it for, and where does it belong, and who is the audiences? Because I felt like it wasn't just, I wasn't doing it just for the sake of it, but I felt that this was a narrative that needed to be heard. And actually, I've also used the word mundane to describe some of the things she talked about, but the mundane was so spectacular because it was made spectacular by that. I was absolutely fascinated to about how obsessed she was with how everybody else looked, and that some of the things that, and what might have been informing that, and whether it was a genuine, even when you write your own diaries, you're all, who are you writing for? Because there's always a risk that someone might read them. So there's nothing that's ever coloured. That isn't coloured by these things, and I don't want to go off on one, but I do feel like there are certain things that I can hear. Olivia, I know your work quite well, and we've spoken a lot about who is this work for, and some of the feedback or thoughts maybe that you were having when people were like, well, why would you want to make a project about that? And it's actually because that perspective on a culture that was so inaccessible actually to a lot of people in the maybe that art school environment, because that's what we were talking about, your university experience. And actually in making that work, you are, I'm going off into another subject now. I'm sorry.
Right, that's completely fine, don't worry.
But I feel like that was something that, this thing of, well, actually you might not be my audience, or I don't know how you feel about it, but when I think about your work, I think, well, there are several audiences, and all of those audiences will get something else from it, something different, because maybe that audience that are like, ooh, the rowdiness and that feeling of unease, where is that unease coming from? Well, this is something that might speak to them in a way that's like, well, actually, I can show you something that maybe you can't see, but then it's also doing these other things where, you are representing a kind of sort of social rituals and cultures that, and bringing them into, and bring a kind of, the thing is, I'm hesitant to say bring a dignity to it or to validate. I don't think we can do that, and I don't think I think that's too simplistic. But I do think it's that thing that you described of taking your dad somewhere and recognizing yourself in something, and recognizing,
I feel you. Yeah. I feel like so with like this the history of illustration and what it teaches us about social history, I feel like it becomes that kind of a bridge into somewhere we can have intergenerational discussion. Do you get what I mean? Some things are hard to verbalize, and then I guess sometimes even culturally or with tradition, it's not everything to be asking questions about, but through illustration it just comfort, and then we can all discuss and learn together, and then just share our experiences. I feel what you're saying.
It's interesting because I guess when we see the word social history, personally related to something, a big event, or something that is, wow, it's that you will read from my history textbook because it's so important to the course of, development of human lives, blah, blah, blah. But then with your sharings about the projects from both of you, it's about discovering those small things, but then using illustrations, images, using this relatively unusual way of documentation, or I'm not sure documentation was the right word, but personal touch to tell these almost forgotten stories in history. It just gives them like more dimension for us to understand the past, the present, and maybe also hinting something in the future. I think especially in the world we're in today, and recently with all the vigorous movements about justice, about representations, yeah, what are your thoughts on that with illustrations? Because I think that's a lot of us here today were graduating this year, you know, joining the world as illustrators, and in a world so chaotic, I would say, today. Yeah, how can we respond to that?
Okay.
It's a bit of a big question, I guess.
Well, how are you feeling about it? I mean, you know.
From what I saw, I think a bit similar to what we discussed earlier. I think it's really interesting how, I guess for illustrators, we have less of that restriction of things have to be academic or have to be like we can be very personal with our work. And then surprisingly, sometimes we didn't realize that we didn't think so much about people agreeing with our work. But when we put something quite personal out, surprisingly, we see a lot of like feedback coming back, like, oh, I feel the same way, which is a bit like the shock of seeing the familiar, like Olivia said earlier. And I don't know, like, does this personal touch on our work a solution, a response to the world we're in today, putting that human touch to our work?
I think definitely what you're saying, like as illustrators, we choose to share our stories. We choose to be a bit vulnerable, and people do respond well to that. Do you get what I mean? But through us encouraging others to share their stories, for illustrators are able to almost like radicalize people, you know, to stir people, to get like encourage people to get going, like, you know, during this time, like what that we're in now, and then everything we've seen flying on social media, you know, we see like Mona Chalabi, she's having like her, you know, her playful infographics about corona, about police brutality flying around on everyone's stories. Everybody's getting educated. Do you know what I mean? We do have a lot that we can do, and something that, if it's just like something passionate about, sharing that invigorates others, which is good, you know.
I mean, we were talking a little bit about this, I mean, I think before we went live, and you know, what I don't want to do is kind of dismiss the anxiety of it all, and how you got to feed your kids, and you know, you got to pay your bills, and you need to survive. But I think, you know, and I think, you know, Jen just put up in the chat something that was going through my head also, is the world is bonkers, and has been, you know, that's not new. And I think it just feels so, it's visceral because it is we're in it now. So this is the drama, the situation that we are in now, and that we can't see the end of, which, you know, it's easy to, you know, to lose sight of the fact that all of those disasters that have happened before, as well as, you know, as well as all of the when people were in those moments, they couldn't see into the future. You know, you can have an educated guess, and you know, you can understand politics, global economics, if you know that, and to make, you know, good assertions about what's coming. I don't think we're all resigned to complete fate, but I think also for you who are graduating now, I do think it is, and I, you know, it's the words that I said just moments before. I do think it's such a special time. I mean, that sounds very wet, but I also, you know, I think that moment when you start to have, and it happens at different times, but it can quite often happen at the end of a course, where you are just starting to think about, there are certain things in your work that are revealing themselves, or ways of working, or subject matters. And you know, the next few years will be so exciting with the urgency, and all moments have been urgent, but the urgency that is now, and the potentials, although, and again, I hate using that word in relation to the disasters we're having, but there are ways of examining and knowing this moment from within it that will be valuable to the future. And I think we as illustrators are very well placed to do that, because our work, I really believe that, you know, illustration and empathy are entwined, you know, so this ability to tell stories, to voice, narrative, history telling, storytelling, to make what is felt of this moment known. We have the ability to do that, and I do think we are seeing that across all different types of media. We're seeing, I am not an expert on the history of illustration, so I don't want to say any emphatic things about what illustration hasn't done before and can do now. But what I do think is we are in a moment where visibility seems easier than it was before. Certainly when I was graduating from Camberwell, might I add, ages ago, like ages and ages and ages ago, it was a different world. And I do think that if we can find ways of describing, making work that we think is important, we put messages into the world. And you should never underestimate the power and responsibility of that. And everyone that makes images and puts them into the world, I think it's our duty as illustrators. This is an educational forum, we are a community, we work together, and that we talk to each other about it and know the kind of the power and the influence that we can have. I don't think everybody has to be involved in social practice as an illustrator, but I do think even if you're like, well, actually, I'm not interested in social practice, but I want to be an illustrator, I'm happy, I want to be a whatever the language now for kind of commissioned work or commercial work, or, being paid to maybe work to someone else's specifics. The truth of it is you're still putting messages into the world, and there is a responsibility in what you depict, and there is an ethics in that representation, as Olivia has already so beautifully spoken about.
I think it's really inspiring when you talked about the responsibility of illustrators, because that is almost like, I guess, for a lot of like fresh graduates this year, when we're feeling uncertain about the future, I think it's very important to remember that we are important with our work, with what we're doing, and we have a role in our world, we have influence. And I think especially when social media has become so accessible, and telling stories comes in so many different ways and forms and platforms.
I don't mean to put the fear of God into anyone either. I do think the joy and and I think, again, Olivia, a thing that you said so beautifully was that what is it that I enjoy? Like, what is it that I love? What are the subjects that I care about? Like, not what I think I should care about or what I think is worthy to care about, but really, and I think if you can go into the world, graduate into the world with that in mind, like, what are the things that I want to describe, then that's a good way. And I think reality also is, is that your practice takes a lifetime to develop, and that's okay, and it will change. And I've just submitted my PhD, and I feel at the beginning of it, and some of those ideas came from stuff that I was doing before I was a third year student at BA level. You know, things ripen and they change and they change and they'll change again. And I think, and you will do lots of different kinds of jobs and lots of kinds of work, and maybe you won't, you know, you'll work for money and you'll work for love and you'll work for, you know, what you think, you know, is the right thing to do, you know. And I think you just, you know, I think you'll survive. That's, you know, that's what you'll have to do.
It's a very important message.
Yeah. Really want to make the work, you'll find ways. I really believe that. It's very blue sky thinking, but I do believe it.
And you know what, yeah, sometimes we have to just take time. Do you get what I mean? When we graduate, yeah, like, okay, maybe some people within 1 year, they'll be here, there, doing whatever. But you know what, yeah, everybody's different. You get me? We're all on our own path. We're doing our thing. We're trying our best. You take your time. The work will be nice. It's there. Do you get what I mean? It's marinating. You're just finessing it. Yeah. That's what I feel. I feel like sometimes, like, you don't want to put too much pressure on yourself. Do you get what I mean? You just do what you can now. Do your best. You just continue with that consistency, you know?
Yeah, it reminds me of what I experienced earlier before the final submission. I think towards the kind of in the beginning of the project, I think some people here probably would feel the same, the stress and pressure of, oh, it's a graduating project, we're going to make it grand and it's great. So I kind of felt that pressure, but then felt like the only way for me to make it good is to have fun with it and not overthink and find the theme and content that I am making. And I think that responds to what you have just shared, of not thinking about what we should care, but we do care, and let that naturally flows within us as image makers, illustrators, artists, or whatever grand position in the world everyone wants to be. And yeah, and I'm sure someone in the world, there will be others having the same mind and responding to that.
It's the same for like audience and positioning as well, which is another thing that Olivia talked about. It's like, you know, I think you sometimes had these ideas of who should be your audience, or, you know, what is the most desirable audience, or where your work should be seen. But, you know, my work isn't you know, the work that it's not supposed to be in the Tate. It's supposed to be in a in the loft of, you know, top floor of Turf Projects. That's where it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be in the Whitgift shopping centre. That is where it was supposed to be. And it's knowing that, like, it's supposed to be in the chicken shop. It's sometimes, you know, listen, the Tate comes knocking at my door, this isn't a rejection. I'm just saying, you need, like, I think I think that sometimes this thing of like, I want to be successful, like, you've got these ideas of what you think success is. And I think actually, for me, the most successful thing was like having people see the work that I'd been making about this woman whose prison diaries were never published. You know, they weren't published, but, you know, 100 years later, someone was making work about it, and it was up in the museum, which is where the archives for that place are. And some people were coming up to it and being like, I don't know what this is about. That's my audience, you know, because they were the people, you know. So so I think this is also a thing to think about, is who you want to speak to with your work, and building your community and engaging in it.
Yeah, and be proud of whoever the group and audience we have reached, and finding that group of people that will resonate with.
That's what illustration can do. I really believe it's a democratic like art medium, which is not true for all of them, I don't think, but I really believe that illustration is. And I think that's why I'm an illustrator.
I like.
Yeah. I think a lot of like messages for a lot of people here joining today. Just thinking about it's about taking time, reflecting on our practice, and thinking about our role. But also, I think it's really important to remember that we are very lucky to know what we like and what we can, do that for a living, and maybe not immediately to support ourselves entirely on doing illustrations, but there are a lot of people in the world who are still searching the thing that they want to do for a lifetime, and a lot of us here actually found that and found that path. Creative field is it's a big world, but we know we're creative and we know we have entered that field just at the beginning, but it's a big world for us to explore, and although it's going to be uncertain, it's still I don't know, I'd say we're the lucky ones that we have the ability and to do what we love. Yeah.
Like build community, keep your friends around you, collective, share your work, put your work online, do what you can, like when I graduated, some of the freelance work that I was getting offered, I couldn't imagine myself doing that. So, just keep putting it out there. You'll be doing bits in theatre, here, there, everywhere. You just trying it, you get what I mean? Sometimes I think, if you don't fully know how to do something, there's no harm in saying, yeah, go on, I'll do it. Then research up and come and do it. Do you know what I mean? That's what we've graduated. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It's already 12 and time just passed by so quickly, and I'll stop the screen for now. And yeah, thank you so much, Olivia and Mireille, for joining us today in the talk, the chat. They're all really interesting, really meaningful and inspiring about discovering stories from the mundane, everyday life. There's beauty in everyday life, and the value and weight and responsibilities and hope and all the uncertainties in a good way. All wrapped up together, like, to all my fellow course mates, graduation as well. There's hope.
Also.
Yeah, congratulations.
Made this conversation happen. You are graduating. Where it you and your work.
Honestly, amazing.
Yeah, so a bit of a advertisement here. Do check out the online graduation. And so thank you so much for your time today. We're seeing like a lot of thank you messages in the chat as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. Big thank you for speakers. Okay, from Mackenzie, thank you. Romaine saying thank you. I'm just reading the messages out. It's a really lovely time. Thank you to Mireille and Olivia from Jen, and a lot of thank yous popping up.
Nice, Kayla. Nice.
Yeah, Kayla saying thank you. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Jen.
Thank
you. Maybe if people don't mind, can turn on their camera and just wave and say bye before we end the meeting. If that's something that you feel comfortable to do. Pat, Cara. Okay, anyone else? But yeah, well, I'll end the meeting here if that's okay. Thank you so much. This